my name is Mia, and I'm a senior at Linfield University studying exercise science and psychology. Now, you might be wondering, why on earth is a Linfield student making content for Lewis and Clark? Well, to answer that question, the answer is Lewis and Clark's Mental Health Validation Program, or MVP for short. As soon as I found out about MVP, I was immediately interested, and I knew that I wanted to get involved somehow. I believe that this program would have been one that impacted my decision to continue playing my sport and possibly would have helped me cope with some of the burnout I was experiencing had there been a program similar at my school. So that's kind of why I'm here. The goal of this podcast series is to really just bring awareness and educate on a variety of mental health topics within the realm of athletics. I am very excited and very grateful to be able to spread knowledge about something that I'm so passionate about. A part of MVP's mission statement, as stated by their webpage, is to break the stigma surrounding mental health for student athletes by fostering a culture of holistic wellness. Let's break that mission statement down a little bit. Why don't we? The definition of stigma, based on a simple Google search, is a mark of disgrace associated with a particular circumstance, quality, or person. The term holistic kind of means what it sounds, relating to or concerned with the whole system, as opposed to just individual parts. So now, how do those relate to mental health? What are we doing here? Well, by creating an environment of holistic wellness, it really emphasizes that the mind and the body are not separate and should be looked at with an understanding of the ways in which they interconnect. So, for example, say you have an injured athlete. This injured athlete is treated physically, yes, but they also have opportunities to be treated psychologically or socially with those parts that come with the injury as well. Now, just because there might be opportunities for athletes to seek care beyond just physical doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to want to take advantage of those opportunities. According to McCabe, DeSorty, Pittmeyer, and Hall's 2023 exploratory study on student-athlete mental health, while 54% of NCAA Division I athletes expressed a need for psychological support, fewer than half actually utilized any mental health resources. So clearly there's barriers that exist, and there are many barriers that exist that explain why athletes don't feel comfortable seeking out psychological help. Some of those barriers include a perceived lack of time, having coaches who are unsupportive or don't encourage that type of help, and overall accessibility or knowledge about resources are also some barriers. Granquist, Hampson-Utley, Kino, and Stiller-Ostrowski's 2015 textbook, Psychosocial Strategies for Athletic Training, explains how many student athletes even feel less comfortable going to counseling centers, especially ones on campus, just simply due to the likelihood of being recognized by a peer. However, the most notable barrier across numerous studies is stigma. Stigma is the main reason in the avoidance of seeking psychological help in student athletes. Why is this? Why is there stigma? You might be wondering. Well, many athletes can agree that the athletic world pushes this sort of grind mentality all the time. You know, there's this big emphasis on work hard, be mentally tough, grind, don't stop, don't give up. And athletes often feel that being an athlete means you need to do all of those things, and then you also need to be independent, in control of your mind and your body, and self-motivated. Now, I want to be clear, I'm not saying those are bad. Working hard, being mentally tough, not giving up, everything I just mentioned, those are not bad skills to have. They should be taught, all of the above. But the issue more so comes with how the athletes perceive these words and this mentality and internalize it, especially when they feel like they can't quite do those things mentally. So when there's this mentality being pushed on you of keep going, keep going, keep going, when you feel like you literally can't, that's when it starts to become a little bit of a toxic issue. And this is kind of where we see personal stigma come into play. Many athletes believe that asking for help is a sign of weakness. And in addition to that, many athletes in general lack a mental health literacy or general education on what mental health even is and why it's important and how it can affect their game, all of the above. So that kind of leads me into talking about the terms mental illness and mental disorder. They mean the same thing, but let me tell you something. I was shocked to see, after Googling other words for mental illness, to find a list of words including derangement, insanity, madness, craziness, and more. I could not believe that those were the words that were used right away on a Google search to describe something that so many people struggle with on a day-to-day basis. I couldn't believe it. And I will admit right off the bat, in my opinion, mental illness and mental disorder do sound intimidating. Both illness and disorder have this very negative connotation to it. And my reason for Googling other words for mental illnesses was so that I could use another word that has less of a negative connotation to it. But seeing that even Google has a stigma towards mental illness, it really dawned on me that me trying to find other words for mental illness and me avoiding that or avoiding mental disorder in this podcast is really not helping me do what I want to do of break the stigma, because avoiding something that's so real and so many people struggle with is not going to help break the stigma. So with that being said, I thought we could kind of redefine what mental disorder means into something a little less intimidating and explain a bit more about what mental health even is. So it's important to understand that mental health is on a continuum. So what this means is for some people, their psychological states do not interfere with their day-to-day activities, their daily lifestyles, whereas some people's psychological states consist of a variety of problematic cognitive, emotional, or behavioral characteristics that do interfere with their daily activities. And that is exactly what Weinberg and Gould's 2024 Foundations of Sport and Exercise Psychology define mental illness as: individuals whose psychological states consist of a variety of problematic cognitive, emotional, or behavioral characteristics. The American Psychiatric Association defines mental illness as health conditions involving changes in emotion, thinking, or behavior, or a combination of these. So even though Google associates mental illness with those awful negative words, I want to reiterate that mental illnesses are absolutely nothing to be ashamed of, because they are quite literally a health condition, just like heart disease, just like anything else medical condition. They are a health condition and they are extremely common. A well-known example of a mental disorder is depression. Like I said, depression is extremely common, with about 1 in 4 Americans having clinical depression at any given time, as defined by Weinberg and Gould's 2024 Foundations of Sport and Exercise Psychology. Depression can alter your cognitive abilities, like your memory. It can affect your emotional state, like a persistent feeling of emptiness or sadness, and it can affect your behavior, such as increased irritability, just to name a few. So with that being said, later I'm going to touch a little bit more on how your mental health can affect your physical performance. But first, let's talk about what it means to be a collegiate athlete today. Being a college student is stressful, whether that be emotionally, academically, socially, financially. The list goes on and on, okay? You get it. But now add the word athlete in there. Being a college athlete not only places all of those stressors I just mentioned, but now you're adding in practices, lifts, film, nutrition, and pressure to perform from either your coaches, your teammates, your family, or let's face it, pressure from yourself. So why do so many people continue to participate even though it sounds really hard and it sounds like a lot of work? Well, most athletes I know would say that the sport is my identity. Like, I don't know any other way. I love my sport and I cannot imagine my life without it. That's a very common answer among athletes. And athletics provide people with so much. You have life lessons, you have friendships, you have leadership. There's so much that you can gain from sports, and you can learn these skills and they can be applied both on the court, on the field, off. And so much of your time is committed to your sport. And like I said earlier, it's so hard for people to imagine their life without it. Bottom line is, being a student athlete is extremely rewarding for many, many people, but that does not mean that it is easy and that it does not come without its challenges. The hard work that you put in all those years at practices, games, and then you finally get recruited, and then you got to transition from this lifestyle into being a collegiate athlete is very overwhelming for many, many people. Another thing that many people don't realize up until they start participating in college athletics is how much your mental health can impact your physical performance. Your mental state can affect your game in a number of ways. For instance, excess anxiety can have literal physiological effects, such as muscle tension, and cognitive effects like negative thoughts, which ultimately can affect your physical performance. I wanted to include an example of how a physiological reaction can affect your physical performance, and this example comes from Weinberg and Gould's 2024 Foundations of Sport and Exercise Psychology. Lamar's high school basketball team is behind 66-67 with 1 second left on the clock when he is fouled in the act of shooting and awarded 2 shots. The opposing coach calls a timeout to try to ice Lamar and let the pressure build. Lamar's coach tells him to just relax and shoot the foul shots as he's done in practice. But Lamar knows how important the game is to his teammates, his coach, the school, his friends, and his family in the stands. He starts to think about how awful he would feel if he let everybody down, and this worrying starts to affect him physically. As he approaches the free throw line, the muscles in his shoulders and arms tighten up. As a result, he rushes his shots, lacks rhythm in his release, and misses both free throws, and his team loses the game. So this example might sound familiar to some, something that you have done so many times. You have a routine, and all of a sudden it's like, this feels like my first time ever doing this. Now, the book goes on to explain that Lamar's coach has him stay after practice to do 100 extra reps of free throws, but what his coach is failing to realize is that it wasn't just the physical side, it wasn't just the ability and the mechanics of why he missed his shots, but it was actually his inability to regulate his anxiety about the intense situation he was in, which ultimately causes muscles to tense up and him to miss the free throws. Now, Lamar's story is an example of an athlete experiencing anxiety in the moment of a highly stressful situation. Now, this is called state anxiety, and it is a type of anxiety that is temporary and presents itself when the athlete feels perceived feelings of nervousness and tension, and that's what can result in the physiological arousal. Now, state anxiety is different than what is called trait anxiety. And trait anxiety is anxiety that is a part of a person's personality rather than just being a temporary in the moment type thing. So therefore, someone who has higher levels of trait anxiety in their day-to-day lives is more likely to experience state anxiety in a stressful situation like what Lamar went through. Now, with a mental disorder like depression, there are many factors that can impact your physical game, such as depleted energy levels, irritability, and eating habits, just to name a few. Another big one of depression's symptoms is a loss or joy of interests in all or most normal activities, which cause a lot of people to want to isolate themselves. And this, again, could lead to withdrawal affecting the team dynamic, causing the depressed teammate to feel guilt that they are the ones letting the team down. And therefore, there's this potential for a vicious cycle of feelings of worthlessness and self-blame. I share this because depression and anxiety are two very common mental illnesses, but there are many other mental illnesses and factors that can contribute to poor performance. But I just wanted to touch on these two because they are very well known. But now let's look at the flip side. How can your performance affect your mental health? Like I said before, many athletes strongly identify with being an athlete, and for many of them, their whole world revolves around their sport. And for some, winning or losing a game dictates their entire mood, thoughts, or actions. For many athletes, having either a good day or a bad day at practice will dictate the rest of their day. You know, the way that they talk to other people, the way that they talk to themselves. And yes, I want to acknowledge, obviously, athletes, you're going to have either a good day or a bad day or a good day or bad game. Like, that happens. But having a bad day is different than having a mental illness. Even athletes who are used to having good days and used to winning, like Michael Phelps, the most decorated Olympic athlete in the world, have their struggles with mental illness. Phelps is a huge advocate for mental health and has opened up publicly about his depression and anxiety. According to the Adelphi Psych Medicine Clinic, after winning 2 silver medals and 4 gold medals at the London 2012 Summer Olympics, Michael Phelps fell into a state of depression and stayed in his room for 4 days without eating or sleeping. Now, the reason I share this example is to show that an athlete's perception of their performance or the outcome of a game can significantly impact your mind, but even taking home the gold does not mean that your mental health is going to be just as golden. At the end of the day, an athlete who is struggling mentally won't just be able to magically get rid of what they're going through just through playing their sport if they're unable to get to the root of the issue. This is why understanding mental health and destigmatizing seeking help is so incredibly important. The pressure placed on collegiate athletes is significant. There's this pressure to perform. There's this pressure to do well in school. There's this pressure to maintain a social life. And there's this pressure to be mentally tough always. Mental toughness is preached in the world of athletics. And I used to say that it was the number one thing that I learned from being an athlete. And don't get me wrong, mental toughness is not wrong because there are going to be times where you're going to have to be mentally tough in life or in athletics. But the issue that kind of comes with this mental toughness term being thrown around is when it's used to brush aside the problematic cognitive, emotional, and behavioral factors that are contributing to mental health issues. The purpose of this podcast is really, again, just to educate people on why this stigma around student-athlete mental health exists and how to break it. There's this common belief that asking for help is a sign of weakness, but in actuality, that is not the case. Recognizing that you need help and taking the step to seek that help is an act of courage. It's an act of strength, and it's a sign of control over your life. And it blows my mind that people consider that a sign of weakness. So that wraps up episode 1, Breaking the Stigma. I hope that, you picked something new up from this episode, and I hope that it reinforced in your brain that mental illnesses are nothing to be ashamed of because they are a health condition, and that stigma does exist and that there is so much that can be done to break this stigma, and it's a group effort and we can do it. So yeah, if you're interested in any of the articles or references that I made, I will be linking those in the description or show notes so you'll have access to those. But yeah, thank you so much for listening. I am excited for episode 2 and have a great day.